My daughter hit the floor before anyone at that table understood what was happening. 1 second she was standing beside her chair, one hand pressed flat against her stomach. The next, she folded straight down onto the restaurant tile like every bit of strength had simply been switched off inside her. For half a second, nobody moved. Then my mother sighed. Not gasped. Not screamed. Sighed, the exact sound she made when a waiter brought the wrong drink. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Eleonora said, setting down her fork like my daughter collapsing was an inconvenience to her evening. My sister Davina leaned back in her chair, mouth pulled tight with annoyance instead of fear. Her husband, Holt, looked away, scrolling his phone like nothing had happened 3 feet from him. Their kids snickered the nickname they'd been throwing at Junie since we'd landed 2 days earlier. Drama Queen. I heard it. Junie heard it. Even while she was gasping on the floor, she heard it. That was the kind of family this had always been. To understand how we got to that restaurant floor, you have to understand what came before it. Not just that week, but years of it, quietly stacking up like interest on a debt nobody admitted existed. I was the older daughter, but somehow never the favored one. Davina arrived 3 years after me, and from the moment she could talk, my parents reorganized the entire household around her moods. If she cried, the house went still. If I cried, I was told to toughen up. By the time we were teenagers, the pattern had calcified into something nobody questioned anymore. Davina's wants were needs, mine were inconveniences. When I became a single mother at 24, that pattern only sharpened. My parents never said it outright, but every visit carried the same undertone, that Junie and I were the cautionary tale in a family photo album otherwise filled with Davina's wedding, Davina's house, Davina's twins. I learned to keep my head down, to show up to the holidays, to smile in the group photos, because the alternative was being erased from them entirely. Junie grew up inside that same undertone. She was sharp enough to notice things long before she had the vocabulary to name them. She noticed that her cousins got birthday calls, and she got birthday texts. She noticed that Grandma Eleonora's voice changed pitch depending on which grandchild she was talking to. She noticed, and she adjusted, the way kids do when love feels conditional. She got quieter, more careful, more apologetic for things that were never her fault to begin with. The only person who never made her feel like an afterthought was my grandmother, Augusta. Augusta used to drive 4 hours just to watch Junie's school recitals when nobody else bothered. She called Junie the brave one, and she meant it, not as a throwaway compliment, but as something she'd actually observed and respected. Augusta died 2 years before that vacation, and something in our family's already thin warmth went with her. So when my mother announced the annual summer trip that year, a rented lake house, paid mostly by Wendell, one last hurrah before the cousins get too old for family trips, I almost said no. Junie convinced me otherwise. She packed her favorite yellow sundress without me even asking. She wanted one good photo of just the two of us by the water, away from everyone else's posing. So I went, against every instinct telling me to stay home. By breakfast on the first morning, she told me her stomach hurt. Quietly, carefully, the way kids speak when they already expect to be mocked for it. "Mom, my belly doesn't feel right." My mother didn't even let me respond. "Oh, please don't start already. We just got here, Vivian." Davina snorted into her coffee. "She's probably trying to get out of the boat tour. Lazy, just like always." The cousins picked it up immediately, giggling under their breath. Drama Queen, sung almost like a nursery rhyme. Light and careless, the kind of cruelty kids learn by watching adults model it first. I crouched beside Junie's chair and asked if she wanted to skip the tour and rest at the house instead. She shook her head fast, eyes flicking toward the table. "No, it's fine. I don't want to be the reason we don't go." That sentence has stayed with me longer than almost anything else that happened that week. My 14-year-old daughter doubled slightly over a plate of untouched pancakes, more afraid of being blamed than she was honest about how much pain she was in. The boat tour lasted 3 hours. Junie sat near the back, one arm wrapped around her stomach, sunglasses hiding most of her face. I sat beside her, asking quietly every 20 minutes if she was okay, getting smaller and smaller nods each time. Holt made a comment at one point about how someone's not getting their money's worth out of this trip, looking directly at Junie when he said it. Nobody corrected him. By the time we docked, she was pale in a way that had nothing to do with sunscreen. When we got back to the house, Junie asked if she could sit out the afternoon hike. My father didn't even look up from tying his boots. "Don't milk it." 3 words. I watched my daughter's face change when she heard them. Not anger. Shame. She lowered her eyes, the way she always did when an adult in this family decided her pain was a performance, and said she'd come along after all. I should have pulled her aside right then, and told her we were staying behind no matter what anyone thought. I didn't. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I told myself 1 more hour wouldn't matter. It mattered. By the time we reached the overlook, Junie was moving slower than the rest of the group, falling further and further behind despite my pace matching hers. Davina noticed and called back over her shoulder, loud enough for the whole trail to hear. Maybe if someone hadn't eaten 3 pancakes, she could keep up. The cousins laughed. Holt didn't say anything, which felt like its own kind of agreement. My mother just kept walking, the way she always did when something uncomfortable happened near her, forward motion as a substitute for actually noticing. I stayed back with my daughter. I told her we'd take our time. She apologized to me 3 separate times for slowing everyone down, and each apology cracked something further open in my chest. At the overlook, while everyone posed for photos, Junie sat on a rock a few feet away, declining to be in the picture because, in her words, "I don't want to ruin it by looking sick." Nobody asked her to join in any way. The photo went up on Eleonora's page within the hour, captioned "Perfect Family Day," with Junie nowhere in frame. By dinner that night, she could barely sit upright in her chair. The restaurant was loud, wine glasses clinking, Davina recounting some story about Holt's promotion, my parents laughing at all the right moments because that's what you do for Davina. Junie sat beside me, quiet, sweat beading along her hairline despite the air conditioning, her face the color of the napkin in her lap. I leaned over. "Junie, talk to me. How bad is it?" She didn't answer. She just stood up, swayed once and dropped. Everything after that moved too fast to feel real. I was on the floor with her before I even registered standing up. A server cleared chairs out of the way. Someone said they were calling for help. My mother was still talking, her voice cutting through the chaos with the same irritation as always. This is exactly the kind of scene she loves to make. I didn't answer her. I didn't have the bandwidth to. I had my hand on my daughter's forehead, telling her to breathe, watching her eyes flutter and lose focus, feeling something inside me go very cold and very still. At the hospital, the lights were too white and the waiting felt endless. Nurses asked questions I answered on autopilot. Doctors ordered scans. Junie was wheeled back for imaging while I sat in a plastic chair gripping my phone like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I texted the family group chat. "We're at the hospital. Please call." No reply. I texted again 40 minutes later. Nothing. An hour passed. Then another. I told myself they were just distracted, that surely someone would notice the silence in the chat and ask what was happening. I called my mother directly. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I called again 10 minutes later. Same result. I refreshed my phone. So many times the screen brightness felt burned into my eyes. Then I saw it. Not a text. A post. Poolside. Blue evening sky behind them. Drinks raised. My parents and Davina's entire family grinning like the night had only improved once we'd left it. Eleonora's arm was around one of the cousins. Wendell was mid-laugh. Davina had her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, looking relaxed in a way she never looked around Junie. The caption read, "Finally having some peace and quiet without the drama. Best night of the trip, honestly." 41 comments already, most of them from family friends adding laughing emojis, a few asking what they'd missed. Davina replying to one with, "Let's just say dinner got a lot more peaceful after a certain someone left." I stared at that screen until my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My daughter was somewhere down a hallway being evaluated for the pain they had mocked for 2 straight days, and they were toasting to her absence in real time, tagging each other, laughing in the comments about how dinner was so much calmer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to walk back into that restaurant and read the caption out loud to their faces. Instead, something in me went quiet in a way I didn't fully understand yet. Not numb. Focused. The doctor came out 2 hours later and said the word that nearly buckled my knees. Appendicitis. Not ruptured. That was the mercy, but close enough that she needed surgery that night. He explained the timeline matter-of-factly. If we'd waited even another several hours, the outcome could have been very different. I thanked him and then sat alone in that hallway for a long moment, thinking about 3 words. Don't milk it. I sat beside my daughter's bed after they brought her back from the operating room, watching her chest rise and fall under thin hospital blankets, and felt 14 years of inherited fear harden into something entirely new. This wasn't a single bad night. It was just the clearest version of something that had always been true. My parents had always treated me like the family's mistake. Davina had always been the one they protected, praised, excused for everything from broken curfews to a DUI nobody ever mentioned at holidays. I'd absorbed that quietly for over 3 decades because I genuinely didn't know there was another option. But sitting in that recovery room, watching my daughter breathe through an oxygen tube while her grandparents posted vacation content, I understood there had always been another option. I'd just never been brave enough to take it. My own grandmother, Augusta, had seen something in Junie that nobody else in this family ever bothered to look for. She used to call her the brave one, and meant it as the highest compliment she had. Augusta passed 2 years ago, and in the chaos of the funeral, there'd been a lot of talk about jewelry, about photo albums, about who got Augusta's china. Almost nobody talked about the lake house in Vermont, the one my parents had quietly continued treating as their own ever since, hosting holidays there, posting pictures from the dock, acting as if ownership had simply transferred to them by default. What they'd conveniently forgotten, or never bothered to read closely, was that Augusta hadn't left that house to them at all. She'd placed it in a trust, and I was the trustee. I hadn't activated it. Partly guilt, partly some leftover hope that things might soften between us if I just kept being patient, kept showing up, kept letting them treat the house like theirs. I told myself enforcing the trust would only widen a gap that already felt too wide to close. That hope ended the moment I read that caption. While Junie slept off anesthesia in a hospital bed 2 states from home, I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my sister. I called Ms. Castellano, the attorney who had handled Augusta's estate from the beginning. My voice didn't shake once. I told her about the restaurant, the hike, the years of being called dramatic for surviving normal childhood pain, and the post that had finally made the pattern impossible to ignore. I told her I was done waiting for any of them to choose basic decency on their own. She pulled the trust documents while I sat in that recovery room. Augusta's terms had always been specific. The lake house would pass into trust for her great-granddaughter, administered by me until Junie turned 18, with full discretion granted to me regarding occupancy in the meantime. My parents had signed the estate paperwork at the funeral without reading past the inheritance summary, too distracted dividing up smaller assets to notice what they'd actually agreed to. Miss Castellano asked me one question before we hung up. Are you certain? Once this moves forward, there's no quiet way to undo it. I thought about the caption. I thought about don't milk it. I thought about every Christmas, where Junie sat at the kids' table alone because nobody bothered making room for her with the cousins. I'm certain, I said. By the time Junie was discharged 4 days later, walking slowly but steady, gripping my arm for support through the airport, the paperwork was ready. A formal notice of trust enforcement. 30 days to vacate the lake house. Full transfer of occupancy rights under Augusta's actual terms, the ones nobody in my family had bothered reading twice. I didn't call ahead. I didn't send any warning messages. Once Junie was settled and resting comfortably at home with my neighbor checking in, I drove to Vermont myself, let myself into the lake house with the spare key Augusta had given me years earlier, and placed the envelope in the center of the kitchen table. Then I sat down across from it and waited. 3 days later, the front door opened. Suitcases rolled across the hardwood floor. Davina laughed first, loud and easy, still glowing from a vacation that had cost my daughter her health, and very nearly cost her a ruptured appendix in an unfamiliar emergency room. My parents walked in tan and rested, carrying the unmistakable air of people who believe they'd won something simply by outlasting an inconvenience. Then they saw me sitting at their table. Then they saw the envelope. My mother's smile dropped first. My father stopped mid-step, keys still in his hand. Davina's eyes narrowed, scanning the room like she was already calculating an angle. "What is this?" I looked at her steadily. "Read it." The kitchen went silent except for the refrigerator humming and the paper sliding under my mother's fingers. She picked it up, scanned the first line, and her face shifted from confusion into something closer to disbelief. "This is Mom's house," Eleonora said, voice rising, meaning Augusta. "This has always been Mom's house." "It was never your house," I said quietly. "Grandma put it in trust for Junie 9 years ago. You signed paperwork at the funeral that confirmed it. You just never read past the part that listed who got the china." Wendell grabbed the letter out of her hands, eyes scanning fast, jaw tightening with every line. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I'm not doing anything," I said. "Miss Castellano is. The trust has been sitting dormant because I let it sit dormant. That ends today." Eleonora's voice cracked into something between fury and disbelief. "Over a post? You're doing all this over a Facebook post." I almost laughed. "I didn't." "No," I said. "I'm doing this because my daughter collapsed on a restaurant floor and all 4 of you called her a drama queen while she gasped for air on the ground. I'm doing this because while she was in surgery, you were toasting to how peaceful your dinner got without her. The post just confirmed what I already knew about every one of you. You don't get the house. You don't get to keep performing this family in a place that was never legally yours to begin with." Davina's composure cracked next. "She's exaggerating. She's always been dramatic. She does this for attention. She has a surgical scar that says otherwise," I said. "Do you have anything besides a caption?" Nobody answered that. Holt, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. "Vivian, come on. We can talk about this like adults." "We're talking about it like adults," I said. "Adults read documents before they sign them. Adults check on family members instead of muting a group chat to post poolside photos. I'm simply doing what an adult does when nobody else in this room has managed it." I stood, smoothed my jacket, and looked at each of them in turn. My mother gripping the counter like it might steady her, my father rereading the letter as if the words might change on a second pass, my sister still searching for an angle that no longer existed for her to find. "You have 30 days, I said. "Miss Castellano's number is on the second page if you'd like to contest it. I wouldn't recommend wasting the money." I walked out without raising my voice once. Some things don't need volume to land. They just need the truth, delivered calmly, by someone who has finally stopped asking permission to protect her own child. Junie was waiting in the car, still pale, still healing, a blanket around her shoulders against the cool Vermont air. She watched me get in, watched my hand steady on the wheel, and asked the only question that actually mattered to her. "Are we okay, Mom?" I reached over and squeezed her hand, the same hand she'd locked onto mine in that hospital bed days earlier. "We're more than okay," I told her. "We're finally free." The weeks that followed weren't simple. My mother called twice, both times to argue rather than apologize. My father sent one stiff email asking if there was room for compromise, which Miss Castellano answered on my behalf with a single line. The trust terms were not open to negotiation. Davina texted me at midnight, accusing me of using my daughter's hospitalization as an excuse to finally get back at the family for years of imagined slights. I read it once and didn't reply. I'd spent 36 years explaining myself to people who never once extended me the same courtesy. 6 months later, Junie picked out new curtains for the lake house. Her lake house now, held in trust until she turns 18, with a clause Miss Castellano added at my request. Any family member found treating her with cruelty forfeits visitation rights to the property permanently. My parents tried contesting the trust once. Their attorney reviewed Augusta's original documents and quietly dropped the case within a week. Davina sent one furious message calling me vindictive and cold. I never replied. Some messages don't deserve an answer, only silence loud enough to speak for itself. Junie healed completely. The scar faded slowly over the following months. What didn't fade was the look on her face the first morning we woke up in that house together, just the two of us. Sunlight pouring through windows that finally, legally, undeniably belonged to her. She stood at the kitchen counter that morning, the same counter where I'd once placed an envelope that changed everything, and asked me something I still think about often. Why didn't Grandma Augusta just tell everyone the house was mine? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. Because she knew real protection doesn't announce itself. It waits quietly until the exact moment it's needed most. And then it shows up right when you finally can't be hurt by them anymore. If you had to choose between staying silent to keep the peace, or finally speaking the truth, even if it costs you the whole family, which one would you choose?